Hey there, urban explorers, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. I'm Drew,
And I'm Clark.
ready to dive into another fascinating topic today, all about urban landscapes.
Yeah, sounds good. I think they've got some really interesting research articles lined up.
So, Clark, I was in Central Park this weekend,
Oh,
and
yeah.
it was so crowded, it was like a sea of sunbathers, I swear.
Oh,
It
wow.
was really tough to find a little patch of shade, but it got me thinking about green spaces in the city,
Yeah.
especially in a place like New York, how valuable they are, but how we need to make sure that they benefit everyone.
Yeah, that's so true. It's like everyone craves that little piece of nature. And,
Mm.
I mean, even with the best intentions, sometimes bringing more nature into the city can have some unintended consequences.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that actually leads us perfectly to today's discourse,
Okay.
green gentrification.
Hmm.
We're going to be exploring how efforts to make our neighborhoods greener can sometimes end up pushing out the very people who live there.
Yeah, and we've got some good research articles today to help us unpack this whole idea.
Absolutely. We've got three sources that we're going to be diving into,
Yeah.
looking at this issue from different angles, from kind of a global perspective
Mm-hmm.
to a closer look at what's happening here in Berlin.
Okay.
So I'm excited to dig in
Yeah.
and see what we find.
Let's do it.
All right, so our first research article kind of gives us this global perspective on green gentrification. And it's interesting because I think a bunch of people just assume that adding more trees and parks to a city is always a good thing.
Right.
But this research shows that it's not always that simple.
Yeah, I mean, there's this huge push for urban greening all over the world right now, and it makes sense. I mean, as we deal with climate change, as we deal with the effects of that,
Right.
those ecosystem services, those benefits we get from nature, those become even more important.
Absolutely.
Having trees clean our air, cool our streets, make cities more livable.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because they point out that just the way we talk about urban greening can be kind of confusing.
Yeah.
We use all these different terms, urban forests, green spaces, nature-based solutions, green infrastructure.
It's true. They all kind of relate to bringing more nature into the city, but the specifics can get a little murky.
Yeah,
I think for our purposes today, we can just think about it as any kind of intentional effort to introduce or enhance
right.
natural elements in urban areas.
Yeah, exactly. And so this article really kind of digs into how those efforts to make cities greener sometimes clash with the need for social equity.
Right.
And a big part of that is this question of how those green spaces are distributed.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the research found that in a lot of cities, low-income neighborhoods and community of color often have less access to parks and gardens and other green amenities.
Yeah, that's a really important point, and that kind of uneven distribution can actually make existing inequalities even worse
Right.
when cities try to add more green space.
Yeah, so the research focuses mainly on U.S. cities, places like New York City, Chicago, Los Angeles, Philadelphia,
Okay.
where a lot of this research is already happening on gentrification.
Right.
But it also looks at some shrinking cities like Detroit and St. Louis,
Interesting.
where they're actually trying to use greening initiatives to attract new residents and revitalize their neighborhoods.
Yeah, but that's the thing. If you're not careful, those greening efforts can actually backfire.
Right.
Right? Instead of revitalizing a neighborhood for the people who already live there, they end up attracting wealthier newcomers,
Yeah.
which drives up property values and ultimately pushes out the longtime residents.
Yeah, it's like they're trading one set of problems for another.
Yeah, exactly.
And it really makes you think about, the different motivations behind these projects.
Mm-hmm.
Are they truly meant to benefit everyone? Or are they just another tool for developers and city officials to kind of reshape neighborhoods according to their own vision?
Right, yeah.
And it's interesting because the researchers in this article didn't just, sit in their ivory towers and speculate about this. They actually went out and interviewed residents, activists, developers, policymakers
Wow.
to get a real feel for what was happening on the ground.
So they were really in the thick of it.
They also observed what was happening in these neighborhoods firsthand, and they even analyzed real estate trends to see how greening was impacting property values.
So really taking this multifaceted approach to
Yeah, exactly.
understanding this issue.
And they found that green gentrification is driven by this complex web of factors. It's not just about adding a park.
Right.
You've got real estate speculation happening where developers are buying up properties in anticipation of those rising values.
Yeah.
You've got public-private partnerships that can sometimes prioritize profit over community needs. And then you have this concept called the green rent gap.
The green rent gap. Okay.
Yeah. Have you heard of this before?
I haven't actually. Break that down for me.
So basically, it refers to the difference in property values between greener neighborhoods and those that lack green space.
Okay.
And so that difference can incentivize developers to come in, invest in greening projects in areas that are right for gentrification, and then jack up the rents.
Oh, wow. So it's like the self-fulfilling prophecy almost.
Yeah, in a way, and that's where understanding the history and the social context of a neighborhood becomes super important.
Yeah.
You can't just drop a park into a community without considering its existing social fabric and the economic forces that are at play.
It's all connected.
Exactly. All right, so let's move on to our second research article.
Okay.
This one takes us to Berlin,
Okay.
a city that's known for its ambitious goal of providing each resident with at least 6 square meters of green space.
Wow. That's pretty impressive.
It is, it's a pretty lofty goal, but the article highlights what they call the green space paradox.
Okay.
So basically, even when you're trying to do something as positive as increasing access to nature, you can inadvertently trigger those social and economic inequalities lead to gentrification.
So even with the best intentions, it can kind of
Yeah.
go sideways.
Exactly.
Interesting.
So to understand how this is playing out in Berlin, the researchers use a method called fuzzy set qualitative comparative analysis, or FSQCA.
FSQCA.
I know it's a mouthful.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. I kind of glazed over when I read that part.
Yeah, me too. But think about it this way. Imagine you're baking a cake. You've got all these different ingredients, flour, sugar, eggs,
Okay.
and you want to figure out what combination of those ingredients will create the perfect cake.
Okay, I like where this is going.
So FSQCA is kind of like that, but instead of ingredients, we're looking at different factors that contribute to gentrification.
Okay.
So things like neighborhood centrality, pre-existing green space housing prices, demographics.
Okay.
And this method helps researchers figure out which combination of these factors is most likely to lead to gentrification.
So it's not just about isolating one ingredient. It's about understanding how they all work together to create that final product.
Yeah, exactly. Or in this case, the gentrified neighborhood.
Okay, I get it now.
Okay, so what did they discover about Berlin's recipe for green gentrification?
All right, lay it on me.
Well, they found that some factors were more important than others. For example, being close to the city center and having some existing green space already
Okay.
made a neighborhood more susceptible to gentrification after new green spaces were added.
So if a neighborhood's already kind of attractive to wealthier residents, adding more green just kind of amps up that desirability.
Yeah, and pushes those prices even higher.
Makes sense.
But here's where it gets interesting. They also found that some of the things that we might assume contribute to gentrification, like the size of a park or its proximity to public transportation, weren't actually consistent predictors.
Wait, so a big, beautiful park with easy access to the subway doesn't necessarily equal gentrification?
Not always. It really depends on the specific context of the neighborhood and
Yeah.
how those other factors that we talked about come into play.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all situation?
Definitely not.
Okay.
And this makes me think about the just green enough approach that they mentioned in the article.
Just green enough. What is that?
So the idea is that instead of focusing on a few large parks,
Okay.
cities might have better luck mitigating gentrification by creating a network of smaller green spaces
Okay.
that are distributed more evenly throughout the city.
So kind of spreading it out a little bit more.
Yeah, you're bringing those benefits of nature to more people without creating these huge spikes in property values in just a few select areas.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But they did emphasize that more research is needed to see if this actually works in practice.
Right. It's a promising idea, but it needs more investigation.
Absolutely. And speaking of things that drive up property values, the researchers pointed out that how much people are willing to pay to live near a green space can actually contribute to gentrification.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And this kind of ties into this whole idea of the sustainability class.
Sustainability class.
These are folks who prioritize an eco-friendly lifestyle and are often willing to shell out extra cash to live in greener neighborhoods.
Okay.
And so their demand for these green spaces can inadvertently drive up prices, pushing out residents who can't afford those premiums.
Yeah, it's like a classic case of unintended consequences. Their heart's in the right place, but
Yeah.
it ends up having these negative effects.
Exactly. And I think the big takeaway here is that the relationship between greening and gentrification is complex,
Yeah,
and we need more research to fully understand it.
absolutely.
But we can already see that it's not as simple as saying parks equal displacement.
Right.
Right, so we've explored the global picture and we've zoomed in on Berlin in part 2 of our discourse. We're going to bring this conversation home to New York City,
Okay.
where the struggle to balance green space and affordability is very real.
I'm ready. Welcome back, Urban Explorers.
So last time we were talking about how those efforts to bring more green into our cities can sometimes have unintended consequences.
Right.
Like driving up housing costs and pushing out longtime residents.
Yeah.
It's almost like we're trying to solve one problem but creating another in the process.
Yeah, it definitely is this delicate balance.
Right.
But the good news is there are people out there working on solutions.
Okay, so let's get into it. What are some ways that cities can make sure these greening projects are equitable and actually benefit everyone?
Well, a lot of researchers and urban planners are really emphasizing this idea of inclusive planning.
Inclusive planning.
Yeah, so what does that mean?
Yeah, what exactly does that mean?
It basically means involving the community every step of the way.
Okay.
So you don't just decide, from the top down where the new park is going to be or what it's going to look like.
Right.
You actually talk to the people who live there. You ask them what they need, what they value, how they envision the space being used.
It's like that saying, nothing about us without us.
Exactly. And, think about that Elizabeth Street Garden case study we were talking about.
Yeah.
If the city had taken a more inclusive approach from the beginning, maybe they could have found a way to both preserve the garden and provide that affordable housing that was so desperately needed.
Yeah, that was a tough one. It felt like a lose-lose situation.
It did, but when you have that genuine community engagement from the start, you're more likely to come up with solutions that actually address everyone's needs and avoid those unintended consequences.
Right, so inclusive planning is key. What else can be done to mitigate this displacement that we're seeing happen with a lot of these greening projects?
Well, I think housing affordability policies have really got to be part of the equation.
Okay.
We can't create these beautiful new green spaces and then just kind of stand by as rents skyrocket and force longtime residents out.
Right, it's almost like we're setting a trap.
Yeah.
We're making these neighborhoods more desirable
Right.
and then making them unaffordable for the people who already live there.
Exactly. So cities need to put policies in place that help keep housing affordable in these areas that are experiencing this green gentrification. Things like rent control, inclusionary zoning, community land trusts. These are all tools that can help keep people in their homes.
We talked about Amsterdam and Lyon as cities that are doing a good job with social housing.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that they're doing that we could learn from here in New York?
Well, in Amsterdam, for example, they have a policy that requires at least 30% of new housing developments to be designated as social housing.
30%.
Yeah, so that means that those units are reserved for low-income residents and they're priced affordably.
Okay.
And this helps ensure that new development is actually benefiting a wider range of people, not just, those at the higher end of the income spectrum.
That's a pretty significant chunk, 30%.
It is, but it's really helped them maintain a more balanced and diverse housing market.
Okay.
And we see similar things in other European cities like Vienna and Berlin that also have these strong social housing programs that have been pretty successful in preventing that kind of large-scale displacement.
I think it's also important to remember that equitable access to green space isn't just about those big fancy parks.
Right.
What about those smaller interventions?
Yeah.
Like pocket parks, community gardens, street trees?
Absolutely. Those smaller scale greening efforts can make a huge difference in the livability of a neighborhood, and they're often more accessible to lower income residents.
Right.
And they can also be more easily integrated into existing communities without causing, those major disruptions.
I'm thinking about all those community gardens that have popped up in vacant lots across New York City.
Yeah.
They're not just providing fresh food. They're also creating those social connections and fostering a sense of ownership and pride in the neighborhood.
I love those community-led initiatives. They're so valuable because they show us that greening doesn't have to be this top-down process imposed by the city.
Right.
It can actually grow organically from the community itself.
So we've got inclusive planning, we've got housing affordability policies, and we've got this idea of equitable access to green space at all scales. Are there any other kind of big ideas out there for tackling green gentrification?
Well, some researchers are looking at how greening initiatives can actually be used to create economic opportunities for existing residents.
Oh, interesting. So instead of just driving up property values,
Right.
which mostly benefits developers and wealthier newcomers, you're finding ways to make sure that people who already live in the neighborhood can actually benefit economically from these greening efforts.
Exactly. For example, some cities are providing job training in green industries like urban farming or green infrastructure maintenance,
Okay.
specifically for residents of those gentrifying neighborhoods.
I love that.
Yeah, and this gives them valuable skills that can lead to better jobs and, a more secure future.
It's about empowering people, not just beautifying the neighborhood.
Right, and some cities are also exploring ways to support local green businesses.
Okay.
So think about those community gardens again.
Yeah.
They can sell their produce at local farmers markets.
Right.
creating a source of income for the people who are actually tending the gardens.
It's like a triple win. You get the environmental benefits, you get the social benefits, and you get the economic benefits, all while preventing displacement. That's what I call sustainable development.
That's it, yeah. But we should also acknowledge that there's no magic bullet for green gentrification.
Right.
What works in one city or even one neighborhood might not work in another.
Of course.
Every place has its own unique context, its own history, its own set of challenges.
So it's about being flexible, being responsive, and understanding the nuances of each situation.
Exactly, and that's why research and data analysis are so important.
Right.
The more we understand about the complexities of this issue, the better equipped we'll be to come up with those effective and equitable solutions.
Well said. It sounds like there's a lot of work to be done, but I'm feeling a bit more optimistic now.
Me too.
It seems like people are starting to recognize the potential pitfalls of these well-intentioned greening initiatives,
Yeah.
and they're actively searching for ways to make them more equitable and inclusive.
I think the key is to keep the conversation going, keep pushing for that inclusive planning, and never lose sight of that ultimate goal of creating cities that are both green and just.
Okay, Urban Explorers, that wraps up part 2 of our exploration of green gentrification. We've talked about some of the challenges, but also some of those exciting solutions that are emerging from research and practice.
Right.
In part 3, we'll shift our focus to you, our listeners. What can you do to make a difference in your own cities and ensure that greening benefits everyone?
Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
All right, Urban Explorers, we're back for the final part of our discourse on green gentrification.
We've covered a lot of ground so far.
Yeah, from global trends to local case studies and some potential solutions. But now
Yeah.
I want to turn the focus to you, our listeners. What can you do to make a difference in your own cities?
Yeah.
It's easy to feel kind of overwhelmed by these big issues like green gentrification. But I think it's important to remember that change starts at the local level.
Absolutely. Even small actions can have that ripple effect.
So let's brainstorm some practical steps that our listeners can take. First off, knowledge is power, right?
It is.
So what can we do to stay informed about this issue?
Yeah, I mean, the more you understand about green gentrification, the better equipped you'll be to advocate for equitable solutions in your own city.
Okay.
So read articles, listen to podcasts like ours,
Right.
attend community meetings, follow local organizations that are working on these issues of urban planning and environmental justice.
Don't be afraid to ask questions.
Exactly.
Reach out to your elected officials, city planners, community leaders. Make sure they're aware of the potential consequences of green gentrification and that they're taking steps to prevent displacement.
Sometimes just bringing it to their attention can make a huge difference.
Yeah.
They might not even be aware of the issue, or they might be thinking about it in a very narrow way without considering those social equity implications.
Right, so stay informed and make your voice heard. What else can our listeners do to get involved?
Well, cities often have public hearings and community board meetings where residents can provide input on proposed development projects.
Right.
So this is your chance to show up and make sure that equity and affordability are being considered alongside environmental sustainability.
And remember those interviews and observations that we talked about in that first research article?
Yeah.
You can actually be a part of that research process by sharing your own experiences and insights about greening in your neighborhood.
Your perspective matters.
Absolutely. And don't underestimate the power of community organizing, joining or starting a local group
Yes.
focused on environmental justice or affordable housing can really amplify your impact.
Yeah, those groups can be incredibly effective at mobilizing residents, putting pressure on decision makers, advocating for policies that actually protect vulnerable communities.
And they can also provide support and information for residents who are directly impacted by green gentrification,
Yeah.
helping them understand their rights, navigate those complex city processes, and connect with resources. So we've got staying informed, getting involved in planning processes, and joining forces with local organizations. What about those smaller scale greening initiatives that we talked about?
Yeah.
Those seem like a great way to kind of bring the benefits of nature to more people without triggering those big spikes in property values.
Absolutely. Volunteering at a community garden, planting trees on your block, or even just advocating for more street trees in your neighborhood can make a real difference.
It's about bringing those benefits of greening to everyone, not just concentrating them in a few wealthy neighborhoods.
Exactly. And don't forget about the power of your own consumer choices,
Right.
Support those local green businesses that are committed to sustainability and social responsibility. Your dollars can make a difference.
I love all these ideas. It's inspiring to think about all the different ways our listeners can take action.
It's easy to feel powerless when we're faced with these big urban challenges, but remember, cities are constantly evolving and they're shaped by the people who live in them.
Right.
Your voice matters, your actions matter.
Well said. So, urban explorers, go forth and green your cities equitably. That's a wrap on our discourse on green gentrification. We hope you found it informative and, most importantly, empowering.
Until next time, keep exploring your city and asking those big questions.